Welcome to Vermont's Voice, your source for the public interest conversation in the State House and beyond. I'm your host, Jordan Hayden. Throughout this series, we'll be investigating some of Vermont's most pressing issues by connecting with leaders and community members all around the state. Together, we'll learn, laugh, and explore opportunities for grassroots action by keeping Vermonters engaged and keeping Vermont cool. So stick around. In today's episode, we'll be chatting with Paul Burns, Executive Director of VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. He also happens to be my boss. Together, we'll talk about the first month of the legislative session, the first week of a Trump presidency, key public interest issue areas for 2025, and whether Paul prefers positive pie or three-penny tap room. This is Vermont's Voice.
All right, Jordan, our viewers are dying to know how closely the vibes in the State House cafeteria match Mean Girls. Who are the plastics? Any comment?
No, I don't think that is a question that I should probably answer, nor do I have an answer to give you on that. So I'm going to plead the fifth, and the viewers are just going to have to wonder. But what I can do is tell you more about myself, because this is the very first episode of this podcast, and I think it makes sense for you to understand the voice that you are going to be listening to. So, again, my name is Jordan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a climate campaign manager, an advocate, and a community organizer, and I work for VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. I have been with VPIRG now for a little over 3 years, and in that time, we've done quite a lot. I've had the honor and privilege of hosting over 100 community events all around the state in all 14 counties with truly countless community members, which is incredible, and also, I think, partnering with over 60 legislators at this point, so really honored to get to do this work every day. And then when I started this role, I had the honor of working on what is now known as the Keep Vermont Cool campaign. In fact, you can see it right here on this little brochure on the table. It is somewhat my pride and joy, and I anticipate you hearing more about it as these episodes progress, or hopefully they continue to progress. We'll see. But the point of the Keep Vermont Cool campaign has really been to bridge the gap between legislators and constituents, to educate, to provide accessible opportunities to take action on climate. Because Vermonters agree that climate change is real, it's important, and we should do something about it. So I feel really passionate about that work. I'm slightly biased towards climate, but I do care about lots of other public interest issue areas, to be clear. So I could probably talk about my work for a really long time, but I'd also like to tell you a little bit about who I am as a person outside of work. And what I can say is that I love pretty much all things local. So going to a local coffee shop and getting an iced mocha latte or an iced tea, sort of rifling through the racks at a local record store, big fan of music, go to lots of concerts and music festivals, and I have tinnitus in both of my ears as evidence of that. So I guess just quick PSA, protect your ears when you're in loud spaces. It definitely makes a difference. Let's see, what else can I tell you? I love gardening. I love growing my own food, and I've been proudly plant-based for over 10 years now. So that's maybe something you'll hear me talk more about. I don't know. And then finally, I'll mention that I love community building and bringing in community. And that's something that I definitely hope to do with this podcast. It's kind of why we're doing it, right? I will be talking, you're hearing my voice, but I also want to hear from you. I want to hear your stories and what makes you tick. The books you're reading, the music that is bringing you inspiration. I want to know all of it. I want this to be an open dialogue for all of us here in Vermont. You are truly Vermont's voice, and so I want to hear from you. Let's talk. Today I'm sitting down with Paul Burns, Executive Director of VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. Now, Paul, you've been with VPIRG, Vermont's largest nonprofit, consumer, and environmental advocacy organization since 2001. And in that time, I think it's fair to say you've accomplished quite a lot. You've played a significant role on the nation's first ban on fracking, new regulations on toxics, GMO food labeling requirements, and the first ever Climate Superfund law. Before your time at VPIRG, though, you did serve as an attorney, advocate, and organizer for the Massachusetts and New York public interest research groups. So all of that to say, you've been pretty busy these past several years, so certainly appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us today. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks. It's a thrill to be part of the podcast, Jordan. It's really nice to be with you. What a nice introduction. And a few years, it's really a few decades, I guess, when you think about it.
True.
So it's my 25th legislative session here, but yes, I've been doing it a long time in a few different states, and I just love it. I can't imagine a better job.
Amazing. Yeah, I think you'd have to love it to do it for such
so.
a long period of time, right? Well, I know you've been in this space before, but I don't think we've had a chance to talk about it. I mean, for me, I think it's looking really great. Maybe there's more to do, but we've got some cool campaign posters up. I mean, how are you feeling about being in this space today?
I love it. And this is an important new way to try to connect with our members and the public too. So I think it's great. It's very exciting.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. And for those who don't know, which I imagine is most folks listening in today, we are filming this in the Montpelier, Vermont office that we have. And at least for me, being in Montpelier towards the beginning of a new year, those first few weeks, the energy is somewhat palpable. Obviously, we are not legislators, but the legislative session is in full swing. There's a lot going on. There's this really wonderful energy, kind of like the first few weeks of school. I wonder if that's an energy that you also feel each time this comes around, or if you're so used to it that it's just another day in Montpelier.
It's not just another day. I mean, the start of every new biennium. Biennium is the word for the 2-year session that we have, and legislators are typically in Montpelier from that first week or so of January through the first or second week of May, and then in an odd number of year they'll leave, and then they'll come back in January the next year for the second year of the biennium. And again, the schedule is about the same, early January to early May. But at the start of a biennium, that is the first time this group of elected legislators is getting together. And for the past couple of bienniums, that has also meant a lot of new faces in both the House and the Senate. So, they're figuring out where the bathroom is, literally,
Right.
in some cases. They're figuring out what committees they're going to be on. This year we had leadership challenges in the House and the Senate, so that was kind of leading right up to the start of the session. It is exciting, and to me, this is an opportunity for our elected leaders to come together and to try to do right by their constituents and by all Vermonters.
Right.
So they all come in with their own ideas of what they want to accomplish. There is a moment of time where anything is possible, and I think that is kind of the positive air that starts out a session. That goes away pretty quickly, but it is exciting. I think it's
Right.
exciting every time.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. Clearly, a lot has already happened. I'm sure you've made some new friends, and we'll talk more about what 2025 is looking like. But first, I do want to acknowledge that it is still January. We recently had a new year, and a lot happened in 2024, too. Just want to take a moment to address that. Especially towards the end there, it was an election year, so I think, at least for me, I heard from a lot of Vermonters of, yes, this is great, let's stay the course, and perhaps some other Vermonters a little more thirsty for change, wanting to maybe not stick to the status quo so much. And so I think some of that has been reflected already in 2025, but I'm curious if you have any reflections, lessons learned from 2024 that could maybe help ground us in this conversation today.
Well, I think in the 24 legislative session, that is what legislators were busy trying to do in last year, we found a lot of important achievement. That is, when we were working on things, recognizing that it's a challenging time economically for many folks, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't try to make sure that the products that you buy don't have toxic chemicals that are going to make you or your children sick.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we can't do more to try to protect our farmers and pollinators from toxic pesticides, for instance. It doesn't mean that we can't do more to promote clean energy solutions for the state and even to hold large fossil fuel companies accountable for the damages that they've caused to our climate, which of course Vermonters realized and saw in ways that were so devastating to communities and to people across the state. So I think legislators took all that seriously, and we ended up having some success in working with them in those areas. I know we'll talk some more about that, but I think it is a demonstration that there are all sorts of issues that legislators and elected leaders in the state have to grapple with at any given time, and it's it's a challenge. It's a significant challenge, and particularly in an environment where you did have significant inflation and affordability issues. I mean, this is it's a popular word, and I think it's something that virtually everybody agrees on. The state should be affordable, an affordable place to live for everybody here. How you go about that is a place where people have different ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally valid. And I think to your point, we can do hard things. We can do multiple things at the same time. It is a challenge, but doesn't mean that we can't try to figure it out.
Right.
Right. And so as we're talking about this, I want to address the elephant in the room a little bit early on. I'm sure it would come up regardless, but just for some table setting here. Trump is president again. And already we've heard that he's extremely interested in pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord. We expected that, but here we are. Yeah. And on a similar, more parallel track here locally, Governor Scott is back in action again, and he is also interested in sort of gutting the Global Warming Solutions Act, right? He's expressed interest in that. And for those who don't know, the Global Warming Solutions Act is more or less sort of a complement to the climate accord, right? It's Vermont's version of that to try to hold us accountable for reducing those emissions in a timely fashion. And so I think what we're seeing here, both locally and nationally, is this attack on climate. Though, of course, we know there are attacks on lots of other public interest issues, to be sure. But I'm wondering, how can we navigate and continue to build relationships with administrations who are perhaps less collaborative, less willing than we would maybe hope? How do you see that?
Well, look, we are less than 2 weeks into a Trump administration, and people are hurting, are frightened, and have reason to be, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There have been many actions already taken by President Trump that will hurt Vermonters, will hurt Americans in a lot of different ways. And that's a huge challenge. I think within that you have the climate and clean energy aspects where the president once again did take steps to pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord, which is a commitment for this country to do our part to reduce climate pollution and to be part of the world agreement to do that. The last time Trump did that, Phil Scott was governor of this state, and he stood up with governors across the country, many of them, and made his own commitment that this state will go forward to reduce climate pollution in order to achieve the goals that science say are essential in order to avoid the worst effects of the climate crisis. So good on Governor Scott for doing that 8 years ago. Unfortunately, he didn't fulfill the commitment, that his administration didn't make the progress that they should have and could have in those intervening years. But even more concerning in some respects now, he's not even standing up to the president. He's not saying, I disagree, it's important that we move forward with this commitment on climate, as he did 8 years ago. Instead, he's saying, yes, I want to repeal, roll back, weaken, we don't know exactly, the commitments that Vermont has made to address climate. And he goes further in really attacking other progress that we have made to promote clean, renewable energy and to basically try to help people get off of fossil fuels, which are dirty, they're expensive, and the price is highly volatile, moves up and down. It is not an affordability agenda to keep people tethered to fossil fuels. And that's why I think ultimately, I think people will be disappointed, honestly, that the governor, who has stood up to this president on a number of other things, seems more in the vein of capitulating with what Trump wants to do on climate. And I just don't think that's where Vermonters are. And I think we will do everything we can to work with our members, so many coalition partners and the public to push back against that so that we can continue to make progress and get folks off of fossil fuels in a way that, yes, is affordable, because it's actually ultimately far more affordable to be heating your home and business and using transportation that is not dependent on dirty fossil fuels.
Absolutely. Yeah, and to your point, I mean, I was not pleased necessarily to hear his remarks at the recent budget address, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. And so I think that's going to continue to be a challenge as well, but we're not alone in that, right? We are prepared to figure that out together.
And look, we want to work with the administration in any way that we can to, if the conversation is how we get there, ensuring that we leave no Vermonter behind when we're talking about the transition to cleaner, more affordable energy. We are here to work with the administration, will always be, no matter who's the governor, frankly.
Right.
And so to your question, I think that's always there for us. But it shouldn't be about whether we keep these commitments. It should be about how we move forward. And that's where I hope we can find some common ground.
Me too. So let's try to do that. So I think also in talking about these things, I've been thinking a lot personally about democracy, right? The strength of our democratic processes. What does that look like moving forward for us? Obviously, for me, I think a lot about ranked choice voting, as I know you do. And to me, that seems sort of like a no-brainer. We need ranked choice voting. And I've heard a lot of people here in Vermont that are really on board with that. They love the concept of it. They want to implement it in practice. But I also hear some hesitation, some trepidation, because I think maybe there's a lack of education or information, right? It's a new thing. It feels maybe scary to go to the poll and try something that's a little different from what you've done before. So I'm wondering what your pitch would be to those folks. How do you pitch a ranked choice voting model?
Well, one thing I'll say is that Vermont is a state that has done more to make it easier for people to vote than almost any other state. And I'm proud of that. And I think Vermonters should be proud of all that the state has done and that the local and state officials have done to make voting free and fair here to the greatest degree possible. And there's always more that we can do. Ranked choice voting is one aspect of that, but we should take some pride in what we've done so far. Ranked choice voting is just another pro-voter initiative. It's a way to give voters a stronger voice and more choices in the process. And very simply, you rank the candidates that you have available to vote for. You rank them 1, 2, 3, and so on in order of preference. If your top choice cannot win, or in the case of a presidential primary, does not have enough votes to qualify for any delegates, then they are eliminated and your vote goes to your next choice there. And I mentioned presidential primaries because that's really where we're focusing our attention now. We did support the idea of using ranked choice voting in Burlington elections. The voters there, more than 6 in 10, voted for using ranked choice voting for mayor and all the other elected offices in Burlington. That seems to be working really well. But some states have gone further, and they say when you're voting for a presidential candidate among the many that may be available, let's say in 3 years or so from now, when voters are choosing the candidates for the Republican or Democratic nomination, there should be no incumbent on the ballot at that time for either party. And that means you typically have a wide open field. There may be a dozen or more candidates that Vermonters have to choose from. In situations like that in the past, though, when Vermonters cast their vote early for their favorite candidate, sometimes that candidate drops out of the race before town meeting day when we hold our presidential primary. Gotcha. More than 10,000 votes in Vermont in recent presidential primaries have been lost or wasted on candidates who already dropped out by the time the primary happens. There's no reason for that in this day and age.
That's a lot.
If you have ranked choice voting and your candidate dropped out, your vote would go to your next choice there. And again, the same would hold true as if your candidate didn't have enough votes or support to win any delegates, it could go to the next candidate, so that you are ultimately having candidates that have broader support. Maybe a little less extreme is another reason why a lot of voters like the idea of ranked choice voting. The candidates that have broader support and appeal among the electorate tend to advance in a presidential primary or in another kind of race where there's a single winner. So we like ranked choice because it gives more power, a stronger voice, more choices to the voters. And I think in places where it has been used, Alaska and Maine are a couple of examples where they've used it in presidential primaries and for federal races. It's quite popular with people there, and voters have voted to keep those systems in place.
Great. Yeah. More choice, more voice. I love that.
There it is.
Doesn't seem so scary, right?
It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I mean, having... You make decisions on what you're going to eat every night. You can decide among a few candidates on the ballot as well, and that's the simple idea, is that this gives you a stronger hand in the process.
Great. Well, I know that we're going to continue to do the work here in Vermont on democracy, but we have also seen a lot of other local progress here. That's the beautiful thing about living in Vermont, is we are able to push the needle on a lot of different issues. Environmental health is one that comes to mind for me. We touched on that just a little bit at the top here. But I do want to just reiterate that we accomplished a lot last session. We were able to ban toxic PFAS chemicals as well as neonicotinoid pesticides in treated seeds. So this is sort of a two-part question. A, how did you celebrate the passage of both of those types of legislation? And then B, what comes next for environmental health? I'm assuming that's not it.
Oh, no, there's always more to do, right, on these things. And we celebrated with the people that helped to make these things happen. And so by the way, you were good with neonicotinoids.
It's hard to say
pretty
that
good.
word.
We often go with neonics as the abbreviation there. People may know of neonics as it is a chemical that it poses significant threats to bees and other pollinators in the state, and also to other forms of wildlife, to water supplies, and even potentially to human health. It's a great idea to move away from that, and so Vermont legislators did that and overrode a gubernatorial veto in order to put that law in place. That's going to be a very good thing for the state of Vermont. And now we're working hard to ensure that it is implemented fully. And that will take place over a period of years before it's finally and fully implemented here. But it's a great law. I think we can continue to look at other pesticides that present threats or risks to wildlife, to our environment, or even to human health. And because it wasn't just one. And I think, again, most people have some sense that pesticides, they have a purpose, and that purpose is to kill something. And sometimes you can use that safely and thoughtfully, and sometimes a chemical may be just too dangerous to use as widely as the neonics have been used. And I think it had a lot of popular support here. So that was, it was fun to celebrate with beekeepers and farmers and other folks who really care about that issue. It was just great. In the area of toxics, I think you mentioned getting a law passed to address PFAS chemicals, also known as forever chemicals. They're a toxic chemical. They're in all sorts of consumer products, and they do present a significant threat to public health. A number of states have taken action there. Part of the law that we passed had the state Agency of Natural Resources write a report looking at what other products might be ripe for further regulation there. So as an example, dental floss has PFAS in it, which you're putting in your mouth, and could again present a threat to public health that way.
Floss today.
Well, I hope so. And so the administration, this is an area where we have agreement with the administration. The Agency of Natural Resources says we should ban it from dental floss and some other things, and we agree with them on that. And so we hope that some legislation can move forward that would allow that to happen this year. I will say that legislation passed unanimously in the House and the Senate and was signed by the governor. So again, that's to say that you can still find broad agreement in certain areas, like to make sure that products aren't going to make you or your family sick. We want to continue to find common ground and move forward with those kinds of programs.
Gotcha. And a unanimous decision doesn't happen often, right?
Not every day, but I think at the end, when people saw that was going to move, who wants to be on the wrong side of that issue?
Yeah, no, terrifying. All right, great. Well, I think we've covered a lot so far, and I just want to give our listeners a moment to sort of absorb all of that. So I think, if it's okay with you, we should do a bit of a palate cleanser.
Okay.
Perhaps a round of this or that.
Sure.
Okay. So it sounds exactly like what it is. I'm just going to name two things, and you can tell me which you prefer.
Okay.
You can explain your answer if you want, though you can also plead the fifth.
Okay, sounds good to me.
All right, great. So first, a beer at 3 penny or a slice at Positive Pie?
Wow, that's a really hard choice, and I love both. But 3 penny is a little closer, and so a beer with friends and colleagues, sometimes after a hard day, is a wonderful thing. So I enjoy that very much.
Sounds great. We should do that again soon.
Yeah.
All right. The State House steps or the Cedar Creek Room?
Well, we're often maybe talking about a photo opportunity or a press event there, and I will say the lighting is typically a lot better on the State House steps. The weather can be a challenge, but I'd rather be outside if we can be.
Yeah, we got to do something about the lighting.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's tough.
First week of the session or town meeting week?
Wow, it's good democracy either way. To me, I like the first week of the session to be in the legislature, back in the building, meeting all sorts of new people and having an opportunity to make a difference at the statewide level. So I lean a little bit toward that.
All right, great. A voice vote or a roll call vote?
To me, a roll call vote is really the best way to have some transparency and accountability. What we mean by that is that legislators go on the record to say whether you vote yes or no on a particular bill. A voice vote is just they call out everybody in favor, say aye, opposed, say nay. and you never know for sure who voted which way. They know that a bill passes or fails that way. But I like the idea of being able to know how each legislator voted on an issue. So we'll go with roll call.
Yeah, I agree. I like that too. And finally, House or Senate?
I'm not going to answer that one. I have great friends in each of those chambers, so we'll
Fair.
leave it at that.
We'll plead the fifth on that one. All right, great. Well, that was fun. Thanks so much for that. So, Paul, do you have any issue areas or campaigns that you're feeling particularly excited about this year?
Yeah, well, I'm excited about a lot of them. But one of the new campaigns that we're working on this year is raising up again the focus on plastics. Many people feel like they're just drowning in plastics. There's too much plastic packaging and waste and so forth. And we want to do more to reduce the overall quantity of plastics, particularly single-use plastics like plastic packaging, and to reduce the toxicity of that plastic as well. Let me give you one example. Just a few miles from where we're sitting right now, you can go to a grocery store, you can buy 3 potatoes. And you can find those potatoes wrapped on a plate of styrofoam, black styrofoam, wrapped in clear plastic packaging. For potatoes,
I don't like that.
That is nuts. It makes no sense at all. You can either buy potatoes individually if you only want 3, or you can buy them in a paper bag that has always been good enough. It seems to work really, really well. What you don't need is to use plastic packaging for your single 1, 2, 3 potatoes. It's going to be around somewhere on this earth for hundreds of years, for the short amount of time that you had it in your cart and brought it to your home and unwrapped that plastic. It is nuts. It makes no sense. And again, that styrofoam in particular is toxic, and you have black trays like that you might get your meat or sushi or something like that in. None of that black plastic is recyclable today. So don't put it in your blue bin at home, because once it gets to the recycling center, they're just going to throw it out anyway. Again, and it's toxic, and you don't want to add more toxic chemicals to the waste stream. You don't want people using those toxics in the creation of these materials, and ultimately they get loose into the environment in one way or another. So I am really excited about the idea that we can do more to require manufacturers to take toxic chemicals out of their packaging and plastic products, and to reduce the overall quantity of plastic material that they are using. And I think that this could be a great year to advance legislation like that. So I think it is an exciting new program for us.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I will say I'm personally terrified of black plastic. I learned about it from you. I learned a lot at this job. Some good, some a little scary, but I'm really excited that we're going to be working on this year.
Yeah.
So thanks for that.
You bet.
All right, I'd like to pivot back to climate now, if we could, for just a moment, because there are just so many updates on that front. And so, again, just setting the table here, last session, Vermont did pass. It was the first in the country to pass the Climate Superfund Act. And so what that means is we are the first state to attempt to hold big oil and gas companies accountable for their fair share of the climate crisis. So that's a big deal. That's a huge deal, actually. We know that other states are trying to follow suit with this, and that's incredible. But of course, when something like this happens, you expect a bit of opposition to come around at some point. And so fast forwarding to a few weeks ago, that's what we're now starting to see. And unfortunately, the American Petroleum Institute and U.S. Chamber of Commerce have filed a lawsuit to attempt to kill the Climate Superfund Act. So what comes next for Vermont? What's your take on this?
Well, it's no surprise to us that the petroleum industry, the big oil, would fight to kill a law that holds that industry accountable. We're talking about the largest of the oil companies in the world, ExxonMobil and Chevron, that type, who have a connection to the state. They will finally be held accountable for the damages that they have caused to our climate and the damages that they have caused to our state. Again, remembering most recently the terrible flooding in 2023 and 2024. Vermonters can't afford that. I mean, somebody's going to have to pay to try to recover from those terrible effects of that flooding and storms. You're either going to have the victims try to pay for that, the taxpayers of Vermont, or you will hold accountable those who caused the problem to begin with. That's what this law does. The Attorney General of the state is prepared to defend our law against any and all attacks from the industry, and we are working to try to help them by helping to implement the law and make it work well to begin with. And if we can be helpful and help in the defense of the law too, we would love to do that as well. I'm confident that the law was crafted carefully, thoughtfully, with expert testimony and input so that it can withstand any legal challenge from this industry.
Great. So you're feeling hopeful.
I am.
Great. Then I will feel hopeful too.
Please.
Excited to see what
It's
comes
a good thing
next.
for Vermonters, and it's really necessary. Again, like, who's going to pay for this? It's about time that those who caused the problem are finally held accountable.
Yeah, I don't want us to pay for it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, last question from me. I'd like to talk a little bit now about data privacy and consumer protection. You've probably recently heard about all of the TikTok drama, the will they, won't they ban the app situation, and all of these tech leaders becoming far more political and powerful than ever before. I think rightfully there are a lot of folks, Vermonters as well, who are concerned about that. So what is on tap for consumer protection and data privacy?
We came very close to passing legislation last year to do more to protect Vermonters' data from the industries that might otherwise misuse the private data that becomes available when people are engaged in commerce online these days. And while we didn't quite overcome a gubernatorial veto there last year, we're coming back to look at some of the concerns that were raised by the governor and by some businesses in the state and see if we can accommodate those while still moving forward to provide greater protections for Vermonters. Because if you lose control of your own identity to giant companies and then it's sold and then, terrible things can happen to your finances, to your record, to your personal life, and nobody wants to see that. So I think we're really pleased to work with the Attorney General and some great legislative leaders. By the way, it's a bipartisan effort and passed, I think, with only 3 votes against it in the House of Representatives. So really great to work with a broad coalition on that to do more to try to protect Vermonters' data. And it's really important at a time like this.
Yeah, agreed. It sounds like Vermont is doing a lot of really great work.
We are. We should be proud of that as a state and trying to look out for the best interests of Vermonters across a whole range of issues. And we're just, we're happy to be part of it.
Absolutely. Well, that's actually all I have for you. I know that we've gotten into a lot this past half hour, whatever it was. I don't know. I've lost track. But I just want to thank you again for being here and just check in with you to see if you have any final thoughts, words, takeaways you'd like to leave us with.
I just say, if you like this, tell your friends, and we'll do it again, I'm sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Again,
Thanks,
Paul
Jordan.
Burns with VPIRG. Thanks so much for being here.
What a pleasure.
And that's our episode. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about anything we've talked about, please visit vpirg.org, get on our mailing lists, and follow us on social media. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and rate us 5 stars. If you have any questions or thoughts about the podcast, feel free to reach out. You can email me at jheiden@vpirg.org. That's JHEIDEN@vpirg.org. I'd also love to give a special shout out and thank you to my co-producers, Katie, Josh, and Elijah. I'm Jordan Heiden, and you've been listening to Vermont's Voice. Take care and talk soon.